The city of Valdosta is more than just their winning sports teams, their 100,000 residents, and their diverse foods. The city embodies the South Georgia culture perfectly, and the Valdosta Lowndes County Historical Society Museum helps tell the story. The museum tells the tales of the former Valdosta residents and the impact that they had in their community and in the world as a whole. The legendary CocaCola Trail, the extremely diverse ecosystem, and textiles that play a vital role in telling Valdosta's story up until the present day.
We're very fortunate to be a community that has a local historical society and is of the good fortune that we're able to operate a museum as a theme for our 50th anniversary. It's called 50 Years, 50 Features. This serves as an encompassing name for the Lowndes County Historical Society's 50th year celebration. Our open definition to this theme is that every varying year has been a feature of events, acquisitions, exhibits, museum relocation, our researchers, library expansion, archive advancement including textile identification, publications, building and grounds developments, tours, programs, and meeting the electronic future. One of the earliest and enduring features was that the Society chose to begin and to operate a museum. The Society welcomes each person to find their favorite feature. The Lowndes County Historical Society began in 1967. As we say, we're very fortunate. Some towns and counties have not even established historical societies. They're a tremendous amount of work. But this one began from a lady named Natalie Sermons Williams and a lady named Vera D. Hagen. And they were involved in historical cultural clubs here, and they just purposed in their minds and hearts and spirits that to do their best to get a historical society begun here. So they went to Dr. William Gabbard at Valdosta State, an esteemed professor. He had actually come to the school when it was still Georgia State Women's College in the late 40s. And they laid it upon Dr. Gabbard to become their helper in beginning the Lowndes County Historical Society. And those three are looked at as our founders. And we greatly appreciate these people and the desire they gave the community to begin to preserve, to collect and preserve, and we also add present that now to the story of Lowndes County. They soon decided to operate a museum. It was in a home that was allowed use by the Archie Griffin family over on Patterson. It, for many years after museum use, was called the Landmark. When the South Georgia Regional Library was being moved out to Woodrow Wilson Drive, this building was left vacant, this Carnegie Library where we are now. And there was work, they were discussing that it be demolished, and because it had a leak, and they found out it was just a hood on the roof that had been improperly closed, and it had leaked for years, and they found out this was actually a very solid building. I know that one of the county commissioners that preserved it for us was Mr. Bodie Chitty, and we had him asked him to write down them saving this building and it being offered to the Historical Society for a museum. So that was in 1977, on the 10th year when the Historical Society moved the museum into this building. And now the phasing studies are completed for the Bird Hospital immediately across Old Brigg Street out here to become more expansion for the Historical Museum.
This bell was very famous and can make a lot of noise. This was the bell for the Valdosta Institute that began in 1885. In 1865, 6 citizens of Valdosta purchased the school on Central Avenue and gave it to the town of Valdosta. The bell tower was officially completed by the McShane Bell Foundry in 1889. It cost 19.5 cents to purchase. There was also a charge of 50 cents per pound for the mountings. The bell was shipped to Valdosta by railroad. One of the biggest stories that is connected to Valdosta, Georgia is a famous drink that is known all around the world. You might have guessed it, CocaCola. Valdosta has bottled Coca-Cola since 1897. Valdosta is also the second oldest Coca-Cola bottling organization in the United States.
In relation to our 50th anniversary, oftentimes on the big anniversaries there's been a publication, but someone else did it for us this year. Published this year in 2017 is this book called The Coca-Cola Trail. And the author, Mr. Jorgensen from Louisiana, contacted the museum once he learned that Valdosta was the second place in the world to bottle Coca-Cola, not to have Coca-Cola, but to bottle it. His goal was to cover the information on Coca-Cola that's not in Atlanta, which is the big corporate headquarters. But we were very pleased to find out that of all the places he put on the Coca-Cola Trail in the United States, chapter number 4 is Valdosta, Georgia. His information on, of course, Valdosta was sent from this museum because we have an extensive archives on Coca-Cola here, Valdosta Bottling Company. Now, when all this became exposed is when they built a new Coca-Cola bottling plant in the 1950s out on Ashley Street here in Valdosta. And the Coca-Cola Bottler magazine ran a feature on it. And in that magazine, from 1897, from the Valdosta Daily Times, stated that they were selling Coke in bottles. Now, how they began bottling here early was, as you can see this example of the stopper top. They call that the Hutchinson bottling system. Coca-Cola was not real keen on the Hutchinson stopper system because they were afraid there was so much competition in the 1890s for colas and what few would make it and become the standard brands. They were very worried people would get this product home in this stopper bottle and it lose its carbonation and go flat, and people say Coca-Cola is not a good product. Mm-hmm. But after the place in Mississippi that first began bottling, Holmes and Barber here did become the second place and were most successful at bottling Coca-Cola. And just to share, ad was run here that actually shows that Holmes and Barber were the first place in Georgia to use the Crown bottling system. Stories along the highway include the composer of Jingle Bells, James Lord Pierpont, living in Savannah, Valdosta, and Quitman. Valdosta being the second place in the world to bottle Coca-Cola, and peanuts being important to the South Georgia economy. So it may be said, if you drive US 84 singing jingle bells while munching on peanuts and sipping Coca-Cola, you're doing something very appropriate to the Wiregrass, Georgia Parkway.
That's good, I like that.
It's like eating peanuts and drinking Coke separately. You're going. Dad, you told me it's just
eating peanuts and drink Coke separately.
We actually do have the locations of everywhere Coca-Cola was bottled here. And as we say, as we expand the museum and have some room, we greatly hope to expand the Coca-Cola experience for people here, for those that so choose to apply their time to that function.
Wiregrass County, named for its native tall grass, is the historic area of the South shared by central Georgia, southeastern Alabama, and the panhandle of Florida. The Wiregrass ecosystem covers a vast area of the southeastern coastal plain, which spans from parts of Florida all the way up to North Carolina, and is slowly expanding to parts of the Mississippi. The ecosystem itself is what provides Valdosta with the resources it needs to produce the things that we're known for.
Well, within our 50 years, and we're speaking of 50 features, but that may just be 50 features even within one element, but one of the big features was when we were asked to help with Valdosta's sesquicentennial in 2010 and find all kinds of different elements of information that had involved the city of Valdosta. As you can see, one of the slogans we found, this was basically the beginning of slogans, was Promotionals beginning in the 1890s. Valdosta had acquired its third major rail line, and the rail line that made this city be what it is today, actually. But it was Gem City of the Wiregrass. We have since then found an emphasis a few years later, besides Queen City of South Georgia, we have seen the town listed as Queen of the Wiregrass. So the phrase that came off of the longleaf pine wiregrass ecosystem had even entered into slogans. One that was very interesting was finally finding out when they started using the phrase the Azalea City, which honored a lot of that, the fact that Mr. Drexel had planted so many azaleas in town, and they're part of the historic plantings even on the Valdosta State campus, or Drexel's azaleas. Of course, the better known ones are some of the newer ones, the beginning of Wintersville, USA, and the town being voted Title Town, USA in 2008. I would like to explain these first two. When the first rail line came out of Savannah, and they were developing actual stations, it would stop other places, but Valdosta was number 15 of the stations coming out of Savannah when the first rail line came. But one thing we included here that was not actually an official station, there are very few good early maps. One of them is a map of the Florida coastline where there were people. It didn't go that far into Florida, but it was a Union naval map during the Civil War, and it's one of the best maps. It picks up South Georgia. Well, Valdosta had just started. It had been moved over from Troopville, had been the county seat, and it got abandoned because people were starting the new town on the railroad. But I find it that the cartographer, the map maker for the Union Naval map maker, was evidently a very smart person that tried to figure each detail, because in our area it shows Troopville and then it shows Waldo Station, and we thought, oh my goodness, how did he come up with Waldo Station? And we thought a little bit, and then we did this. And if you take off the first half of the W, what does it spell?
Valdosta.
Valdosta was, because that one little bit of rail line came here, this was a place that refugees came. But what happened was, when Sherman took Atlanta, he actually wanted all the civilians gone. And so they were all, he was going to sit there and plan his march to the sea in Atlanta, and he really wanted the people gone. And that's when some of Valdosta's leading citizens were Civil War refugees, and they could get here because the rail had just gotten here a few months before the Civil War broke out. So they were the only skirmish basically involved around here were when troops came down the rail line from Savannah, and they disembarked, and then they marched to Madison, Florida, and then they went towards Jacksonville for the Battle of Olustee. people are surprisingly interested into our ecosystem here and what it has meant to the development of community. And we explain the dynamic of the forest here to people, and the wiregrass, which was the predominant ground cover, it actually is kind of tough when it's mature, and it's actually pyrogenic, and you can like throw a match on it and it'll go poof. And so it would help produce fire that spread across the forest floor that would keep the forest floor open. But what was so interesting is the longleaf pine grows very slowly, but it develops this tremendous taproot that allows the tree to survive fires. And I mean, a fire could be hot enough to burn anything up. But also, by the same token, you see palmetto in our forest. Well, the palmetto is basically a palm tree with the root in the ground, so it would survive. But the wiregrass is so interesting, one thing that's so interesting is after it burns, within a couple of days it produces this very soft shoot that provides food for animals. And a lot of the animals, the small animals during these fires, actually went into the gopher tortoise holes, which the gopher tortoise is almost, this is a good bit of its range right here. But the holes of the gopher tortoise would give protection to the animals. Even rattlesnakes would crawl into the gopher tortoise holes with other animals. And so it's just, it's very interesting what was going on in our forest and still does in the remnants where it still exists. But anyway, we look at things, study it, and then tie it to our local history.
Valdosta's wiregrass ecosystem played and still plays an important role in everyday things that you may take for granted in your short time here in Lowndes County. The museum, which is a nonprofit organization, features lots of things about the history of Valdosta if one were interested in getting more information on the Azalea City. The museum's collections include archives and collections having to do with various wars that have some connection to Valdosta. Also, adding to the museum's collection is their research library, textiles, albums of World War II memories, and their scrapbooks. The question that often presents itself and often stumps people is, what is a textile? A textile is a various amount of different things, ranging from men, women, and children's clothing, college and high school memorabilia, flags, wedding attire, etc.
The textiles were actually first started collecting in 1967. It was actually our second acquisition that came in. And so that was kind of interesting. But then later on, Orlia Tomlinson in one of our newsletters had asked for textiles to come in because it turns out that textiles are part of our history.
The museum and staff take pride in preserving and showcasing the stories of those who have served our country. From the Civil War to the most recent veterans, the museum houses many uniforms, records, and artifacts of our service members. If you or anybody else that you know would want to see a specific textile, they will have to call the museum in advance, and Miss Amy will have to go through certain steps to display and show the textile. She has to put a sheet on the table. Our bodies secrete oils that could damage the textiles permanently. Therefore, Miss Amy has to take the proper precautions when handling these textiles to help preserve their original and authentic state.
And you can see here, this is what I wanted to show you, was what this is a cotton netting that we have here. And it actually has gold inside it that was hammered. And that's the technique that was used in this one. We did some research on this, and it turns out that it was really cool. That there was a group that went to, that did a tour at one point in time. And this is what I was talking about with, that we have some that are set up so that you can actually see what's going on for displays and stuff. This was a tour, and these are local people that went on this tour and took a boat. It was called the Olympia. It was the sister ship to the Titanic. And it was, yes, and they were all on the Olympia when the Titanic went down.
The museum's 50th anniversary and 50 features is more than just the history of Valdosta, recovered textiles, a vast ecosystem, and the early beginnings of Coca-Cola. Valdosta embodies the South Georgia culture in all its accomplishments and will continue to do so as the heart of the South lives on.